Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Enterprise AI isn't just a tool, it's the heartbeat of smart organizations like yours, helping to reinvent work to deliver higher growth, more customers, and better experiences. Join us as we discover how AI-powered work orchestration and automation is making things better for everyone: customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Transform Now and our weekly pulse check on AI and automation news, where we check out the latest stories affecting you. So this week we got 4, Brad, and we got some new vocabulary language to teach everybody as well. So Let's start off with the first one from Tech Monitor, and the article is entitled AI Data Centers Are the New Power Play, and Most CIOs Will Never Build One. The article basically says that while data centers are being built nearly everywhere, there's some built-in dangers, if you will, or restrictions associated with getting all these data centers up and running and actually operating them after the fact. So what did you take out of this particular article?
Yeah, data centers in and of themselves are not, it's not the most exciting topic, but it is one.
Let's talk warehouses. Let's talk warehouses better.
I do think this article is interesting because it's bringing attention to the fact that whereas in the past, CIOs, CTOs, that was a regular part of what they did, right? Especially as we've been moving to the cloud, they had to make plans and strategies around where all the core business applications were going to be managed, and so it was a key responsibility. It was something that they were heavily involved in. This article is making the case that that has completely changed, and now we have an entire industry around data centers that has come about largely in response to AI and the need for vast amounts of high-powered servers and other things like really good cooling, which we'll talk about in a second. It mentions that the overall spending on AI infrastructure is projected to hit $200 billion by 2027. That's according to IDC. And Europe is, this year alone, supposedly growing their data center supply by 20%. That's according to CBRE. So this is a huge trend. It is a huge industry, as I said. The article says that the typical building in London, for example, might have 4 backup generators to keep the power going in case of some kind of outage, whereas a data center with all these AI servers might need between 20 and 50 generators. So
well, that's if they don't have their own nuclear power plant right next door, right?
Right next door, yes, 3 Mile Island, right down the street. So, yeah, I think it's a big shift. The cloud certainly was one pivot point that we had many years ago, but now with AI, it's exponentially greater. In fact, you may remember. A couple months ago, we did a story about CoreWeave, which is one of the startups that is in this space. And I think, if I recall, they initially were doing Bitcoin mining, and then they said, well, there's no money in that. We should turn these into AI data centers. And so now they're building a lot more, and they're basically data centers for hire from large companies. I was in New York City earlier this week, Michael, and CoreWeave was advertising all over, like Times Square, huge ads everywhere.
I think the naked cowboy who plays his guitar in Times Square probably is very happy that CoreWeave is advertising there, as are all of the other people who generally go to Times Square to see that and to see Elmo and etc. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the cowboy thinks it's like a new hairstyle or something. He has no idea. CoreWeave has to do with AI infrastructure. So yeah, I don't think they had advertisements in Times Square about data centers 5 or 10 years ago, but that's just a symptom of where we are. So yeah, I think certainly the government's involved. All the governments globally are getting involved in this data center push. President Trump in the U.S. has done deals with OpenAI and Oracle and others, and they just continue to mushroom all over the place. I just recently learned that some of the big Silicon Valley companies in California are going to be building more data centers in Texas, where I live. So they're looking for lots of real estate and much cheaper real estate. Not that it's cheap here in Texas anymore, but there's a lot more of it available than in California. And we'll see data centers everywhere we look before too long, unless something changes.
That's one of the things that the article brought up, and I want to make sure that we cover, because as you say, there's a need for more computing power, and these companies are bringing these online to be able to supply that. But as you say, hey, there's expensive land in Texas, unless you go far west in Texas, and it's not as expensive to put there. But now you're further away from all of the consumers of that data, all the organizations, companies that may be in Austin, for example. Right. Now there's a latency issue with accessing data between various data centers. So while there may be land in very inexpensive places and people say, oh, this is wonderful, let's go put a data center here. The problem is now you've introduced another problem, which is now data latency, which could then affect the way that the performance of the machines within that data center operate. So there's a lot of trade-offs, like where do we locate these things? I keep thinking of like the high frequency traders on Wall Street. They want to be like right next to the exchange. Why is that? Because it reduces the latency substantially, and every bazillionth of a second makes a difference.
Absolutely. And I have a brother-in-law who works in fiber optics, and he deals with this latency issue in financial services. So I think he just like rustled out of bed when he heard you say that, and he's rushing to these Texas tech giants that are building data centers. So,
no doubt. Well, we'll keep an eye on this one as we go forward for sure. Our second one is actually from a corporate website. It's from JP Morgan, and this is an open letter to third-party suppliers, written by their CIO or CISO, their Chief Information Security Officer, talking about all of these platform services that have now provided new and great services for lots of organizations. So software as a service, platform as a service, this is becoming the new norm. However, as he points out, there's some security implications related to relying on some of these software as a service vendors. Take us through it.
Yeah, this was an interesting move from the CISO over at JP Morgan, and it's to all of us, right? Anyone who's making software these days, because the industry is largely gone, software as a service in terms of its protocol. And so he is raising the alarm that from his perspective, the race to innovate has created a really, really dangerous dynamic. That's speed over security. So he is afraid that, and seeing examples where in the rush to provide the greatest features and functionality, especially in AI-centric world that we're in, companies have kind of lost sight of making sure that they're strengthening the security protocols, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that we're not making it easier for hackers in going forward to penetrate these companies and get at sensitive data. And certainly we've seen so many examples of companies using AI too abruptly and not putting the right guardrails and things around it. That's a different issue. It's related, but I think that probably is part of what's behind this. The fact that they just see a world where everyone's going fast, and change comes and you need to react to it. And I think the CISO is seeing a trend with all the SaaS companies that they have to go so quickly to keep up with the competitors that security has kind of faded into the background, and he's worried about it. And so he basically puts a challenge out there to all SaaS companies, saying that he really wants all of us to prioritize security over functionality And the more that we do that, the more that they're going to embrace, those companies and the ones that are doing it correctly. I think about the big ERP providers as an example. I mean, they've got so many more clients than a lot of us because they've been at it for years and years and years. And just the roots they have in all these companies, and they're part of the group that's being called out. So we'll see how everyone responds, and I'm sure this has got the attention of a lot of very large tech companies around the world.
No doubt. I think we can see this as a general issue, and it's not something new, but it's something that's become a lot more focused because you look at it's more of a centralized infrastructure risk. So if you had a bridge that went across a lake or a river, and the nearest bridge beyond that is maybe 20 miles away, people will really appreciate that bridge until it needs to be repaired, or there's an accident that closes it, or something else that happens where it's no longer there. And now everyone who relied on it has to reroute, and it causes a lot of issues. That's just in a situation where it's an annoyance. What if you have these situations where you have a third-party software as a service provider who offers an unrelated type of service to you, but they base their security or their modules on something else that's centralized? Well, we've seen this with when you have a Microsoft outage, how an Azure data center closure in one area can affect industries globally. And so it's not because they're not prepared for it. It's just that when we build on top of other centralized infrastructure, we realize that becomes a risk, that becomes something we need to focus on. In the past, we had the mainframe, and if the mainframe is down, that corporation had an issue. Now it's if this authentication mechanism is down that goes through fill in the blank software service provider, that might affect dozens or hundreds of organizations globally inadvertently. So there's a lot of things that have to be taken into account. And that's why I think this JP Morgan Chase open letters is again, sounding the alarm. Hey, innovation's been great. We've all been moving forward. We're getting all these really great services coming up. However, because we're building on top of, we really need to maybe take a step back and realize, could this house of cards fall with one card that's in the middle that we really haven't really paid a lot of attention to?
Yeah. And if anyone thinks JP Morgan's going to be the first company out there embracing agentic AI, you might think twice, because let me read a quote from the CISO. The explosive growth of new value-bearing services in data management, automation, artificial intelligence, and AI agents amplifies and rapidly distributes these security risks, bringing them directly to the forefront of every organization. So that's pretty specific, and you can tell that this whirlwind of innovation that has occurred has really shaken them up and gotten them thinking about all the new vulnerabilities that may come from it. So interesting approach. And like I said, we'll see how all of their vendors respond and cater to this. And that will probably set a new trend in the industry, especially in financial services.
Right, absolutely. So our next article, again, is from an organization directly. This is from OpenAI, and this is about their own product. And it's not necessarily about a feature release. It's about a sort of a rollback, and for a reason why. So this article from OpenAI's website is called Sycophancy in GPT-4o, What Happened and How and What We're Doing About It. So Brad, I use sycophancy and sycophantic in nearly every conversation I have because it's obsequious, and that's what I like to do. Anyway, these are 50-cent words we're throwing around here, but the idea behind it is the ChatGPT 4o has become much more agreeable to folks in their responses, but maybe not authentically so. Can you talk us through this one?
Yeah, and I will acknowledge, when I started seeing articles on this topic, I had to look it up. I probably had seen the word, but didn't fully understand what it meant. But yeah, they were throwing it around like it was a word we use 100 times a day. So sycophantic. So this is a really interesting development in the world of large language models, because OpenAI in their latest release of GPT 4.0, they had incorporated this sycophantic approach to responses from the model, and they did it in response to user feedback, and they did a lot of testing where they'll provide responses from the model and they'll let people score them. Which response do you like better? Which response hits you in the best way? Which one felt more encouraging, or kind of made you want to go further and interact with the model? Which ones offended you? I mean, they're asking all these questions, and they took all that feedback, and as a result of that, made the model, the latest release, more sycophantic, so that it was overly flattering and agreeable. And so much so, and this is where the controversy came in, people noticed that when they would put in prompts that involved psychosis or mental illness or really significant challenges that they were having, the model would come back and would give them this affirmation and this flattery or agreeable stances that would almost encourage that person to go further in this horrible state that they're in, right? Instead of talking them off the ledge, encouraging them to get help, it was too agreeable with bad behavior or misaligned prompts that would lead you in a bad direction. And so all of this collectively started kind of sounding the alarms from the customer base. And so they started looking at it, and they realized, hey, we missed the boat. We thought that our broader user base wanted more of this, but clearly they don't. Clearly the negatives that come with it are much greater than the positives. And so they have backed it out. They've also come forward and said that they're going to provide more mechanisms for more immediate feedback. So it's not just let's wait and see over time how the public responds. They have now, they're going to add mechanisms so that on the spot you can tell OpenAI, hey, that prompt was rude or was misdirected or not appropriate for these reasons, and they will take that into account. And they're certainly going to change their testing methods, which led to this in the first place. One of the biggest things, though, that I thought was interesting is they say in the article that it was very enlightening for them to learn how much people are using ChatGPT for personal advice. That really wasn't even something they thought would happen in the early origins of the model. And now they fully understand that things have evolved to the point where people are using ChatGPT for everything, including advice, including encouragement, including career direction, any topic, all topics. So I think that's been a wake-up call for them, and they're going to try to, as they say, be more responsible and make sure that they have the right guardrails in place to ensure safety. And the model's not going to lead anyone to self-harm or other bad consequences. So I got to give them credit for responding the way they did, taking it down, I think just 1 week after they released it. So it wasn't like it sat out there in this state for too long. And I think the models will be better as a result of this going forward. Kind of a painful way to learn about it, but I think it sounds like they're taking it to heart.
Well, I thought it was interesting. A couple of different things. One of them is they talk about, you mentioned the feedback, but they identify these as personalities. And you'll be able to choose from multiple, default personalities. And so I thought that was quite interesting, because there may be folks who need a more encouraging viewpoint for very specific things. Perhaps not, hey, I feel like an arsonist and I have a pyromaniac tendencies, to have them come back and say, well, most people feel that way. And it's okay to do that. I understand how you might not want to have that kind of encouragement. But the reality is that there may be folks who are looking at this in different aspects. And it surprises me a little bit too, Obviously, they forgot the movie script Her. Because in the script, the idea behind it was that people got personally attached to these AIs. And we're seeing this in real life because as we are getting more and more interesting responses back, I think it's very natural to ask somebody who you are talking with. Again, somebody, if you talk with a friend, you're naturally going to go from, hey, we're business colleagues, but also, hey, did you try that restaurant? And now you're going to a personal kind of discussion, right? So this is kind of normal when you talk about interaction with the people. And I think we are seeing this shift, and it's becoming more natural to quote unquote talk with the machine because of the responses and because of the sophistication of these models. So I applaud them for going down this path. And I think it's going to be interesting to be able to see this whole kind of idea of personalities coming out, because I see, and this is one of my 2025 thought processes of what's happening in 2025, to see personas emerge with agents and whatnot. To have them have personalities as well could be very interesting. So let's see how this develops. Our last article from today is, again, I hate going into politics, but this is an interesting thing on governance. And this is from Politico, and the article is titled, House Sends Intimate Deepfakes Bill to Trump's Desk. Now, we've all heard a number of different times how big tech has been pushing back on any kind of regulations that would cause them to have to monitor or police their own platforms. And I see now that this is something I think they're starting to budge on as they see the technology becoming so advanced and realizing that, perhaps there needs to be some guardrails that are imposed upon this type of technology. Can you lead us through this article?
I'm definitely going to gloat a little bit about this one because it was actually one of my predictions for the year that deepfakes would be one of the first areas targeted by regulation. And I didn't say what country would do it. I thought maybe it was Europe first. But when I saw this, I felt very validated because it just makes so much sense. I mean, deepfakes have become so indistinguishable from real video. And I think all of us have been fooled more than once. And the fact now that people are starting to use it in very negative, harmful ways, embarrassing ways, against other people. And it's a very, very, very bad and illicit use of AI. And the fact that the US president has a bill on his desk that he could sign into law, I think is a good thing. This is one of the first highly bipartisan agreements in the Trump administration where both the Senate and the House, both parties were nearly unanimous in supporting this. I think there were only two people.
I want to know who the two are who would say, you know what? I don't think we should have this kind of law.
Yeah, I mean, they're the freedom of speech people, I assume, that are just taking it to the nth degree. That if you regulate this, it's a slippery slope, and other things will be censored or suppressed. So I think that's the perspective. But yeah, I can't see anyone voting against it. So I do hope it's called the Take It Down Act, by the way, because it criminalizes the publication of non-consensual intimate imagery, including deepfakes, and the tech platforms will be forced to remove it immediately. And the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is going to have to regulate it. But it's a much needed thing. And noted in the article was an AI lobbying group called Americans for Responsible Innovation. And they're doing backflips over this because they're looking at this and saying, this is like one of the first times that we've actually been able to, because they've supported this, obviously, but it's one of the first times the tech companies have not blocked some form of regulation that goes against AI. And so they view this as a really positive development, assuming it's going to get signed. But the president's wife, the first lady, is one of the biggest supporters. So I'm assuming it will get signed. Plus, it's a good thing to sign. But this is a good example of regulation that's much needed. And I would hope this would be in place globally as well, because we need to eliminate the knuckleheads that are using AI in a very harmful way.
Yep, I agree. It will be interesting to see what they determine as intimate. And the only reason I said that is because I recall during the presidential election period, there were deep fakes of the two candidates walking on the beach and kissing each other. That would be Kamala
Mhm.
Harris and Donald Trump at the time. And that would that be considered an intimate thing to be taken down, or would that be considered a caricature that was reflecting some sort of,
Yeah.
silliness? Again, that's where it's going to come down to whether or not that's considered intimate and who determines what intimate is. Because again, obviously that was a caricature for political silliness. I mean, that's all it
Right.
was. However, could that be looped into this law as something that would have been taken down? So anyway,
Yeah.
I do not envy the people who have to determine what that is, because I'm sure in doing so, their eyes are going to be bleeding after having to look at things they probably don't want to.
No
So,
doubt. No
yeah.
doubt.
Well, we're going to end on that at the moment. So we've had a bunch of different articles on this particular episode, but we also have all kinds of really fantastic guests that we interview every week. So please check out those episodes as well. In the meantime, please also look in the show notes for this episode for all the links to the articles we covered today, and we'll see you on next week's Pulse Check.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of enterprise AI, subscribe now. The future of work is here.